Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 3 in Australian social policy. So in week 2, we turned our focus to understanding social policy problems, and we focused on building a shared understanding of social problems. We also considered approaches to social policy analysis, and we also discussed about political traditions. So in week 3, we now turn our attention to addressing problems and how social policy tries to do that, and even the principles underpinning the process of addressing social problems through social policy approaches. So we really aim to explain the scope and purpose of social policy through the lenses of the rights and obligations of citizenship in contemporary welfare regimes. And we are trying to define key concepts such as commodification, decommodification, social stratification, and even the concept of welfare states itself. And of course, we shall try to outline the key features of welfare regimes put forward by Richard Titmuss and S. Anderson. So we are using the word welfare to talk about the welfare state. That is the extent to which governments in different countries provide goods, services, and really redistribute resources to achieve social outcomes for their citizens. So we'll be looking at the work of S. Anderson and Titmuss, whom we spoke about in week 1. And we are really trying to understand the language they employ when categorizing different approaches to welfare provision. So we shall be very much building on the content from week 2. And if you can still remember, in week 2, we tried to speak about policy as an attempt to solve problems. We shall try to explore that in more details and how it works across different states, different welfare regimes. But also we spoke about social policy solutions which construct problems as certain types of problems. And we shall, explore that again and what it means for different welfare regimes. And even the values and beliefs that shape the way in which we construct problems and influence the way we really think about the best way to deal with those problems is again something we shall try to build on in this weekly module. So before we jump in into that, it is really important to clarify what we even mean by welfare and to consider why different countries might do things differently. And some quotes, especially this quote which you really have in your weekly reading, will be very important in that welfare raises fundamental questions about the rights and obligations of citizenship and about the scope and purpose of public policy, which is essentially about our responsibilities one for another. So this quote and some of the other content you might be considering really speak to the tensions which exist in the scholarly literature and even in public policy debates as to, what is the role of the government in providing, public services and social welfare generally. And should it even be the responsibility of the government, or should it be the responsibility of the market, or should it even be the responsibility of citizens themselves? And what does it mean in doing things in one way or the other? And in the Padlet, which I suggested that you work on initially in this course, in this week, there is this question of the role and responsibility of the government. And it's interesting for me to really start seeing, why do you think the government should be responsible for the welfare of its citizens? Is it a question of, legitimacy for the government? Or is it just a question of the contract, what is termed the social contract? Or is it because we perceive that the government has the means and ends of, doing that? So again, I would love to see how you reflect on this and the examples you really try to put forward in justifying that. So again, all these considerations, they really make us to consider again the tensions between the principles of community responsibility toward others and that of personal responsibility towards oneself, which again really represent one of the key value tensions in contemporary welfare debates. So the priority which we might end up giving to one or the other in terms of responsibility towards others or responsibility towards oneself really depends on the value given to reducing dependency on the government or to promoting equality. And again, all these are key ideologies and and belief systems underpinning how things are done. And I think this in itself justifies, why things are done in different ways across different nations. There is also a tension between, the promotion of individual freedoms, which we spoke about in week 2, and the promotion of equality and positive freedoms. And again, all these are key, considerations underpinning the tensions we might see in contemporary welfare regimes. So that's one of the reasons why clearly you might see that in some Western countries, the approach might be very much leaning toward individual responsibility, and with that meaning limited state interference. Whereas in other countries, you might see a strong push towards community responsibility for well-being. And again, all this explains key questions we might see in some countries around, for example, social inequalities. Why, for example, in some countries, which we keep referring to as rich countries, we still have people who are extremely rich and other people who are extremely poor. And again, all these are key considerations which might explain, these tensions and the way they operate across different welfare state. So in context where promoting equality is highly valued, the government typically plays a bigger role in redistributing resources, and that in itself can be very important to regulating inequality, as I have just started saying. But we still see a few tensions between promoting individual freedoms and promoting equality and positive freedoms. And even the scholars themselves really still face these tensions on what should be the role of the state, what should be the role of individuals, what should be the role of the market in providing public services. So, and again, this takes us back to the lectures from last week where we started thinking about political traditions. And we might want to go back to that and thinking back on the different political traditions which we outlined. Can you still remember some of these traditions? The egalitarian tradition, the social liberal tradition. What else? The libertarian tradition. So can you think again about these traditions and think which side of this debate we have started engaging in would align with each of these traditions? For example, can you think of which political tradition would connect with the idea of the state promoting individual freedoms? Hopefully you are thinking about the libertarian tradition. And if we are thinking about promoting equality and positive freedom, maybe that would fit very much with the social liberal tradition, or even to a greater extent, the egalitarian traditions, which seeks to promote equality. And again, you will see really that all these debates are very value-laden. They are very much informed by what we believe in and what different countries are trying to do in promoting welfare through one way or another. Now, speaking about that, it's very important to clarify that political traditions, which we spoke about last week, are two but distinct concepts with welfare regimes. So welfare regimes and political traditions, these are two separate things, and we don't need to be confusing them. When we speak about political traditions, which we discussed really about last week, we are really thinking about how to categorize different sets of values and beliefs about individuals, the state, and the market in the society. So we referred to the work of Dalton last week when we spoke about political tradition, which was extended by McClelland. And we spoke about 5 different political traditions, the libertarian tradition, the social liberal, the egalitarian, communitarian, and the conservative tradition, which was added by McClelland on Dalton's 4 initially conceptualized traditions. So this week that was really the focus of last week's lecture. But this week we are mostly focusing on the welfare regimes. That's quite different from the political traditions. And what we really mean by welfare regimes is simply, a way of categorizing the way in which we see or the way in which different countries deliver welfare across the world. So we are using the welfare regimes, categorized by Richard Titmuss initially, and which were, completed by Spink Anderson. So these are, again, just ways really of categorizing how different countries deliver welfare. And of course, researchers around the world have been thinking about different names and categories to describe countries with similar approaches, and we'll be very much exploring those categories throughout this mini lecture. So when we are talking about the welfare state or frameworks of social policy, so the models of welfare adopted by different countries, we are really considering an approach that emerged in the 19th and 20th century. When capitalist countries began adopting different models of social policy as they started thinking and developing, welfare state. And again, this debate is not only relevant to social policy, but even other disciplines like, economy or economics. There is this old debate among classical economists, scholars, even in economics and sociology and political sciences, as to what extent the government should be intervening in the economy, for example. And this is exactly what we are talking about, and you'll see that much of that debate is still relevant to when it comes to social welfare and social policy more broadly. So the way in which really countries choose to respond to social problems and provide social welfare is quite different. Countries do things differently. And maybe an acknowledgement I have to make at this point is that in this content, you'll see that there is a lot of Eurocentrism. We are mostly focusing on Western countries, but you might even want to think more about the so-called global South and these developing nations. Do they have their own models of welfare? And maybe that's another way we can start thinking when trying to understand things in a more global and globalized context. So yes, really, when talking about social welfare, we are trying to consider all these, but also trying to shape the unique social, cultural, and economic context underpinning social welfare states among different countries in different parts of the world. And of course, various models have been developed to try and categorize these different approaches to welfare. And one of them, probably the most frequently used, the most frequently critiqued, is the one developed by Titmuss, and which was expanded by Esping Anderson. And that's the model we are considering. But the key debate remains, this question of responsibility and this question of the role of the state, the market, and the citizens toward, delivering social welfare. So we shall be, in the next few recordings, we shall be mostly considering the key approaches to welfare which were developed by Titmus and Esping Anderson. And these include the liberal, the conservative, and the social democratic ideologies. So we shall have more details on these and what they mean in different parts of the world where they are practiced. So at this point, I would like now to invite you to go back to your Padlets and see what learning activities you have there. Try to respond to the different learning activities, and I'll see you in the next module.